Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras, here with ILTV's Morning Briefing. An anonymous, top-level Middle East intelligence official has just told the New York Times that Israel is behind a massive assassination operation in Syria. A few days ago, Aziz Asbar and his driver were killed in an apparent car bombing. Asbar is one of Syria's leading rocket scientists who worked on numerous projects with both Iranian and Hezbollah weapons teams. Israel, as per policy, has neither confirmed nor denied any role in his death, though one minister has said that it's, quote, a good thing that he's dead. The unnamed source in the New York Times report says that Israel contacted his agency to inform them of the attack on Asbar. He or she goes on to explain that Asbar had been a primary target of the Mossad for several years. This wouldn't be much of a surprise, considering Asbar's role in developing chemical weapons for the Assad regime, his high-level security status with both Iran and Hezbollah, and his work on streamlining a new breed of precision-guided middle-range Tishreen rockets. Adding some credence to the idea that Israel may indeed be behind the hit, the base where Asbar was killed is reportedly the same site that IDF airstrikes allegedly struck at least twice this year. Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, however, has downplayed the idea of Israel's role in the assassination, saying, quote, every day in the Middle East there are hundreds of explosions and settling of scores. Every time they try to place the blame on us, so we won't take this too seriously, end quote. Either way, it's clear that Israel is relieved to have this weapons chief out of commission, though. As Public Security and Strategic Affairs Minister Gilad Erdan points out, Asbar is the man responsible for placing some very lethal weapons, quote, in the hands of some very bad people. With the first wave of United States sanctions on Iran officially now in effect, Israeli leaders are hopeful that the pressure will either topple the regime or else deter them from their current war path. Prime Minister Netanyahu has hailed U.S. President Donald Trump for defying the rest of the world by reimposing those sanctions. For now, it remains to be seen if Europe, Russia, and China will be able to preserve the current nuclear deal with Iran, or if a major change is on the horizon. According to him, this first wave of new American financial pressure stands a good chance of forcing Iran to renegotiate the terms of the JCPOA nuclear deal. Erdogan has slammed the EU, which he describes as morally bankrupt, for defying sanctions in lieu of preserving the original terms of the deal. Iran now faces a difficult turning point. On one hand, the regime says they would stay in the deal if Europe, China, and Russia can counter the financial pressure of Trump's new sanctions. But on the other hand, if the deal collapses, they've threatened to resume developing nuclear weapons immediately. This is a move that depends on whether or not the regime can even stand on its feet financially, especially with internal dissent and protest growing daily. This may indeed be the very scenario Israel is hoping to see, but with Iran threatening to close the crucial Bab al-Mandeb Strait, Israel could be looking at a $15 billion hit in trade as well. It remains to be seen if such a move would amount to the declaration of war. Nurses across all Israeli hospitals, as well as in the Clalit and Meuchedet health organizations, are now again engaging in an open-ended general strike. 2 rounds of negotiations in the past 24 hours have failed to result in a solution, as nurses call out the government for failures in addressing violence against health workers. According to the health ministry itself, there are more than 3,000 incidents of violence against medical staff annually. Very few reports ever make it to trial. Just last month, a patient at a hospital in Be'er Yaakov stabbed a 65-year-old nurse when he was refused treatment. Nurses are therefore calling on the government to protect health workers from violence with new policies, and to fund these policies in kind to ensure their implementation. Policies such as setting up a national security unit and creating an alarm app that nurses can use to alert these units when they're being threatened. And most importantly, actually punishing violent offenders with steep penalties and/or jail time. Until their demands are met, practically all services will stop, except for specific emergencies, natal health, intensive care, and care for the aged. Nurses outside the nurses' union, however, like those working for Leumi and Maccabi, are not participating in the strike. A disturbing report has just been released by the Israel Health Ministry after nearly a year-long investigation. The head of poultry diseases at the Agriculture Ministry's Veterinary Services Unit has just announced that roughly 30%, yes, nearly a third, of the eggs produced in Israel are contaminated with Salmonella. What's worse is that nearly 5% of the eggs tested were infected with an aggressive strain that can be life-threatening to the elderly, the sick, and young children. This is hardly the first time that Salmonella has been reported in Israel, but over the past year, the reported numbers have surged. In reports from September 2017, the number of eggs marketed in Israel suspected of being infected was less than 1%, lower than in both Europe and the United States. That's why soaring up to 30% is so alarming. Even the Director General of the Agriculture Ministry, Ariel Wittman, said he refrains from eating Israeli eggs, and that nearly 10% of the egg-laying hens in the country have been culled. Reports say that poor hygiene in the coops is to blame, and that it's not likely to change much unless massive government grants come through. So for those who do eat eggs, remember to store your eggs in the fridge in their original packaging. Do not wash them and throw the shells away into the trash as soon as you've used it. Don't leave them on the counter, and if you have to, separate the yolks outside the shell. And last but certainly not least, cook your eggs thoroughly. Heat kills bacteria and germs. That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.